Greetings, my friends. This is Celeria Rosenkreuz, and on this episode of the Chronological Quran, episode 26, we return to Tafsir Ibn Kathir and shall examine his treatment of ayat 5 of Surah 1. First, let us examine this section, which discusses the linguistic roots of nabudu, which is the word translated as the verb worship. As you can see, the root word means subdued, which reflects very well the nature of worship in Islam, and the relationship that the humans under it can have to Allah. They are broken free of the need to persist in individualist behavior, but are instead made unresistant and unquestioning. Otherwise, they would risk falling into disbelief. Oh, you have doubts? What doubts, man? Such is the general inclination and goal of Islam, and it is reflected in what the religion's name actually means. A literal translation of Islam is submission. There is a curious resemblance here to the command of Genesis 1:28, that man ought to fill the earth and subdue it. But here it is the untamed wilds of men's hearts that are to be subjugated, for worship by definition demands this in Islam. Surah al-Fatihah is the primary and most important prayer in Islam, after all, and in the same way that a wilderness must be conquered by man in order to be paved over, a heart must be conquered by Allah for the appropriate levels of ecstasy, humility, and fear to be inculcated in the hearts of the Islamic believers, for their Islam to actually be then perfected. At this point, it is worth noting that the precise translation being displayed here is flawed, and essentially skips over one half of the words in the ayah, as Ibn Kathir mentions here. It is not you we worship, but you alone we worship, which reflects the emphasis Islam is placing, at least in principle, on turning away from polytheism. Likewise, you alone we ask for help, which Ibn Kathir rightly emphasizes is a rejection of humanity having any sort of power and control over the world. It is not, as Genesis would have it, the case that humans have gone forth to subdue the world, but that the world has always been in subjection to Allah, as far as Islam is concerned, despite Allah allowing humans to go astray and turn away from Him for whatever reason. Of course, there is great tension presented here. If Allah is all-knowing and all-powerful, as the quoted verse below implies in connection with this one, and ethically speaking, it would place all the blame for the evils of the world squarely on Allah's shoulders, given it implies that He purposefully allows things to evolve in such a way, and does not actually desire that every soul might be saved or turned towards Him. Otherwise, His behavior is utterly irrational rather than just being evil. If we take Islam's claims seriously, at least, rather than looking at this from the perspective of Allah not really having the power and awareness that the religion claims He does. Here you will see a version of Tawheed being explained. Ad-Dahak narrated that Ibn Abbas said, "You we worship" means, "It is you whom we single out, whom we fear, and whom we hope in. You alone, our Lord, and none else." Now you will notice that here the logic is, of all the options available, we choose Allah alone. Given again, this is written to contrast polytheism, because the fear is greatest for one perceived to be the most powerful and capable of all the gods, and thus the default logically should be that it is only in submission to such a God that there is any hope at all, especially given the emphasis on graphic torture that Muhammad had already proclaimed in the previous surah. Of course, this assumes Islam's claims are true, and therefore runs into a bit of a problem, because the Quran is, even so early as 5 surahs in, riddled with errors, sharp contrasts with the biblical tradition that the Quran is claiming to draw from, and many indications of both horrible disposition and behavior on the part of Allah. There is neither reason to believe He is all-knowing and all-powerful, nor that He would be trustworthy, even if it were so. In fact, the logical conclusion is that you should neither believe Allah is powerful or trustworthy, simply because of all the evidence the Quran offers up in its pages to the contrary. This will become more and more clear as we continue to proceed. This excerpt reads, "You we worship, and you we ask for help from," contains Allah's command to us to perform sincere worship for Him and to seek His aid concerning all our affairs. Allah mentioned "you we worship" before and "you we ask for help from," because the objective here is the worship, while Allah's help is the tool to implement this objective. Certainly, one first takes care of the most important aspects, and then what is less important, and Allah knows best. Now, I should at this point offer a caveat. The above is relating the opinion of Qatada and Ibn Kathir, and I don't think it necessarily follows from the text. If, in fact, it is the case that the placement of "you alone we worship" actually indicates priority, and that the granting of any sort of aid in response to prayer is primarily to facilitate prayer to Him, this makes Allah seem to be an even more obviously egotistical prick, who only cares instrumentally about His followers because they make him feel good about himself, and expand his influence in the world by spreading the religion to others. That is the logical conclusion of worship being prioritized, and this speaks to Islam, or at least Allah, not espousing any sort of implicit responsibility in keeping with the level of power or authority a leader or ruler has over the followers or subjects. A king that does not care about the citizens of the nation he rules over other than as a means to acquire taxes does not deserve to be the one in charge of the nation's policy, and likewise, the same principle follows here. If Allah does not actually care about His religion's followers save as a means to extract worship, then He does not deserve to be the disposer of the Ummah's affairs. To wrap things up, we get a reiteration of Allah calling Muhammad His slave, and then subsequently telling him to worship Him until he dies, and thus there is no turning back for him, as well as a reference to the curiously uncited journey on a magical flying donkey which Muhammad is said to have made during the middle of the night. Given we don't have any sort of actual quotation here, I cannot properly judge it, other than to say that it is unlikely that he could have actually traveled to heaven, given Allah clearly is not who He claims to be, assuming He actually exists at all and was not actually a lie presented by Jibreel or Muhammad in order to make the religion more broadly appealing. Unfortunately, when there is so much falsehood wound up into a narrative, it becomes hard to be certain about things at times. That having been said, this has been Celery Rosencreux, and I thank you for joining me. Until next, my words greet your ears. Farewell.